thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Daily Memphians Tigers podcast. I'm the Memphis basketball beat writer, Stephen Johnson, joined by my guy, the football beat writer, Frank Bonner. Got a lot on tap for today's episode. There's a big game with football, Mississippi State SEC opponent. But before we jump to that, don't forget to check out some of our other podcasts. Jennifer Biggs hosts Sound Bites. Eric Barnes hosts The Sidebar. And my guys, Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, record the Grizzlies podcast every single week. You can find all of these and the Tigers podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and, of course, at dailymemphian.com. Now, that's out of the way. The game, I think a lot of Memphis football fans circled when the schedule came out, is Mississippi State, home game at the Liberty Bowl, coming up this Saturday. But before we get into that, the Tigers had a little bit of a scare last week. It seemed like they were in complete control in Arkansas State, but then I looked up, and they only won by 5 points. Frank, you were obviously there. Just how wild and how crazy was that game last week?
I mean, the second half got pretty wild. Arkansas State started making some chunk plays. They had a couple bad breaks. You see Greg Rubin, who made the tip pass, but somehow still fell in the receiver's hand, 53-yard touchdown. And so the secondary got beat on a few plays, which caused for some touchdowns there late.
For you, was it? So I know the Tigers, they were at almost 20 at one point. And we know how football teams do when they get those big leads. A lot of times they're just playing back, just keeping things in front of them. How much did that kind of play into the yardage, or was it more so just Arkansas State just kind of carving up the defense?
I mean, I guess you could say it was a little bit of both. And I think the defense wasn't necessarily in bad position, right? They just didn't make the plays. And so it wasn't that they were just carving up the defense and the defense just couldn't get a handle on things. They were in pretty good position. It's just that, a ball that looked like it could have been tipped wasn't tipped. And so, they were just a little off at times in their execution, but they were in the right position for the most part of the game.
Offensively, I mean, Seth Hennigan, once again, he's playing a lot older than many, 18, true freshman. He's playing like he's a senior that's been starting multiple years. Calvin Austin had a big game. Sean Dyson, Brandon Thomas. We knew there were going to be a couple new pieces on the offensive line, a new quarterback. I guess 2 games in, how impressed have you been with the offensive production so far?
I've been very impressed, specifically looking at that last game on third down out of Seth Hennigan. I mean, a freshman quarterback, the game was getting tight. On third down, he was as good as you could expect him to be. And I think that is huge for a freshman quarterback. And then obviously you said Brandon Thomas getting involved. And I love to see tight ends get involved the way that Sean Dykes did. I think that's huge for college football offenses. If you can get your tight end to be a pass catcher, I think that can open up the field even more for offenses. So it was good to see that. And I think they're just rolling. The offensive side, the offensive line is holding up good enough for Seth to do what he needs to do. And if the offense continues to play like this, and then the defense, if they, clean up some of the issues that they had, I think they're in a pretty good spot against Mississippi State this weekend.
Speaking of Mississippi State, I think the Bulldogs are 2-0 coming into this game.
Yeah.
I know they had an early scare week 1. I think they had a nice win last week against kind of NC State. So what type of challenge are the Bulldogs going to present for the Tigers this weekend?
Well, I think, for one, just the nature of the game being so big and in the atmosphere and everything, I think that's going to play a little role in the freshman quarterback. I mean, I know he's been poised, but this is the biggest game of him. So obviously that's a part of it. But specifically on the field, they got some pretty good corners. And so I think looking at what the offense has been able to do in the secondary for Memphis with Calvin Johnson getting going, or Calvin Austin getting going, Ivory getting going, Sean Dykes. I think those cornerbacks are going to try to clamp down on that. So if you're Seth, you don't want to get baited into throwing interception, because this Mississippi State defense has they've got 3 interceptions and 2 fumble recoveries on the year. And so they're going to be looking to create some turnovers. So Seth has got to, kind of pay attention to that.
You got to imagine Mississippi State's going to be keying in on Calvin and Dice a lot. That's what kind of teams did last year when they wanted to slow Memphis down. Or going to be some other guys in that receiver or tight end group that may have to step up with those 2 guys getting a lot of attention from Mississippi State.
Well, Javon, I think he showed that he can do it against Mississippi State. And I think if all the focus is on Austin and Dykes, the chemistry with Seth and Javon looked really good in that season opener. So I think this is another opportunity for them to kind of show that a bit if everybody's going to be focused on Calvin and Sean Dykes.
A lot of times when these, I know the AAC wants to call itself the Power Six, but a lot of times when these Group of 5 teams play these Power 5 teams, the game is ultimately kind of decide the line of the scrimmage. Can you block an SEC D line? Can you get penetration against the SEC O line? What do you think? What's the challenge going to be for Memphis up front on both sides of the ball from Mississippi State?
Yeah. So this is an interesting conversation. So I got a call from one of the Mississippi State beat writers the other day, and we just kind of chopped it up. And we were talking about the Mississippi State O-line, and he said the O-line kind of struggled in the first 2 games, specifically at the guard position. So if you're Memphis has done a solid job getting in the backfield, just haven't done the best job at getting tackles in the backfield. So if you can get that initial push and just finish the job by getting the tackles, I think Memphis could bode well for their defensive line if they can get back there and finish the job.
All right, did Morris Joseph play last week, or the Tigers' top defensive lineman?
No, Morris Joseph did not play last week. But Silverfield said that he expects him to be back this Saturday. And then one of the players had mentioned that he was back. And so I think he's going to go for this week, which is huge for them, with this being a big game to have him back.
All right, we know Mike Leach, a lot of air raid, probably not much running the ball. I guess, how is the secondary? We know what happened last week. How are they approaching kind of bouncing back against a team that's probably a little bit more talented?
They didn't hide from the fact that they made some mistakes, but they are hanging their heads. They still are a confident group. Greg Rubin has played well in his first 2 games. He had 6 pass deflections in that game.
Oh wow!
He was just getting targeted a lot. So it's not like they just came out and laid an egg. They're still, and I think they're going to come out and obviously play better down the stretch than they did against Arkansas State. But I think that defensive line, getting pressure in the backfield should help the secondary, do their job.
All right. So Memphis, the last time I looked at the line, Memphis was only a 4-point underdog. So it looks like Vegas, the odds makers, think this will be close. So I think a win wouldn't necessarily be an upset, but Frank, in order for Memphis to get this win, what would be maybe 3 keys that Memphis has to achieve in order to knock out Mississippi State?
Well, I'll put Seth and Brandon as one key. They've got to continue being what they were. The defense obviously has to play better than they did against Arkansas State. And then turnovers. Mississippi State has been good getting turnovers, and so you've got to protect the ball, which Memphis has done for the most part. And so I don't think that'll be a major issue, but those are 3 key aspects.
Well, I think this will be probably the biggest post-COVID crowd, probably since, the SMU game in 2019 when they had college game day. So I'm expecting the last time Mississippi State came here, I was in high school. My dad took me to that game. It was packed. There are a lot of Mississippi State fans here, so I think you're going to see a good crowd, great crowd. Not a lot of news in basketball. Anything you want to chop it up about before we get out of here?
Well, I know the projected seeding rankings came out. Just what are your initial thoughts on where Memphis lines up and all of that?
Well, Joe Lunardi, ESPN, he's one of those maybe the top bracketologists in the country. And I think this is a good indication. We're still a little ways out from preseason polls and stuff, but Memphis was projected as a 2 seed, I believe, in the Midwest region with UCLA and a couple other teams. So obviously, to me, that lets me know that Memphis will probably be in that top 10 range to kind of start the season off. And I think if you're a 2 seed, I think that's a great regular season. That means you probably knocked off of Houston, you probably beat Tennessee, and maybe Alabama, and also did good in Brooklyn where they'll be facing Virginia Tech and Xavier and things like that nature. So the Tigers have to get a top 4 seed. I think that means they had a kind of a tremendous regular season. And I think whenever these preseason polls start coming out, probably next month, I think you'll see the Tigers in that top 10 range. I think from a talent perspective, they're probably a top 5 roster, but I think you'll maybe see them around like 8, 9, maybe 7, because they still got to prove it on the court. And there are going to be some people that are a little skeptical. So the Tigers will have their chances, but it seems like they'll be ranked pretty high once the preseason opens up.
I know recently you wrote something kind of dissecting the offense a little bit. What are you seeing out of this offense, or what are you projecting out of this offense compared to some of these last teams?
Well, you would think just adding a guy like Imani Bates would that's going to help the offense out a lot. He's a talented shot maker. They're going to try to use him at point guard. So in theory, you would think he would be able to draw a lot of attention and create even more open looks for the Tigers on offense. You also have Jalen Duren, who rebounding has never necessarily been an issue for the Tigers. They were top 20, top 30 in a lot of metrics last year. Duren's only going to come in and help that. And he's a great finisher inside too. I think I did a piece of the Basketball Insider. Memphis only shot like 48% on their 2-pointers. So that means a lot of layups, a lot of missed dunks, a lot of gimmies. So just having, I think, those two guys and a guy like Earl Timberlake from Miami, who's a pretty talented slasher, you see those numbers start to rise, and they just got to improve free throws. They were one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country. There are, 350 or so Division I teams. Memphis was like 340. So I think if you can improve on those two numbers alone right there, because they share the ball pretty well. They show a lot of effort on the glass. They're going to be one of the top rebounding teams probably again this year. We know they can do it on defense. If they can just shoot more free throws, convert a little more easier baskets, and get the turnovers down a little bit. Memphis likes to play fast, so there's going to be some turnovers. You got to excuse that sometimes, but you can't average 16 assists and 15 turnovers. You know what I mean? So I think they have to be a little more efficient inside and keeping possession of the ball. But I think with the talent they brought in and with some of the coaches they have, specifically Larry Brown, I think the offense should take a big jump this year, you would think.
And my last take for you is, obviously there's a lot of excitement surrounding this team. They got a stacked roster, but, I mean, you can't expect it to be all roses through the entire season. I mean, there are going to be some bumps, some growing pains. They're going to have games where they don't play well. How do you think the fan base is going to react when those games happen?
I think it really just depends. Like if, let's say we get in the conference play and this team, let's say they just get rocked by Tulsa or something like that, the fan base isn't going to be happy, and they shouldn't be. It's one thing if you're playing Alabama or Tennessee, probably top 15, top 10 teams, and maybe you just don't play your best. Hey, those things happen. But I think as long as the Tigers win the games they're supposed to, whether it's pretty, whether it's ugly, as long as they're winning the games you're supposed to, if you lose to like a Murray State, you lose to like a Western Kentucky this type of year, I think that would kind of send the fans into a frenzy. And like I said, it would be justified. There's too much talent on this roster. And now you have both the experience with the players and the coaches. So, there are really no excuses. I'm not saying that the Tigers are not going to fly through this regular season undefeated. I don't think. I'm not going to wood just in case. But I think fans, this is the roster that probably shouldn't lose more than a half a dozen games. You know what I mean? If you split with Houston, you split with Alabama, let's say maybe you drop one or two more conference games, that's like only 4 or 5 losses right there, and that's a tremendous regular season. So as long as the Tigers handle their business and play to their talent level and beat the team they're supposed to and knock off a couple of these teams, I don't think they have to go undefeated against Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Houston twice. I don't think they need to go undefeated, but you want to have a good showing. So as long as they do that, I think the fan base will be pretty patient and just be kind of looking towards March.
And we can't end this podcast without acknowledging that Isaac Bruce will be getting honored for the Pro Football Hall of Fame induction at halftime against Mississippi State. I think that is a great opportunity for this Memphis secondary to kind of put on a show in front of, one of the best receivers to do it in Memphis. I think that adds another level of excitement to this weekend. And I just wanted to make sure that we mention that before we head off of here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is going to be a big game for the city. We know with all the realignment talk and, I think a lot of people are going to be kind of focusing on stadium attendance because Memphis fans want to show these Power 5 conferences how much this is not just a basketball school. We do care about football. We do want it to be successful. So I'm expecting a big crowd. Isaac Bruce, SEC opponent, undefeated. Maybe Memphis wins this game. Maybe you start getting a couple top 25 votes. So there's a lot at stake. And hey, man, I'm a little jealous of you this weekend. I think you're gonna have a good time. With the fans, though, I will say the fans who don't show up to the game, you got to turn on the TV
because television rights do matter. And so if you aren't at the game, you got to watch it.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's an SEC opponent, local. I'm not sure they got any Memphis kids on the roster. There's no reason this shouldn't be one of the most watched games in the market this year. And it really should be the biggest crowd of the year. So we'll see. I think the Tigers fans are going to come out in full force, and we'll see if the Tigers can get it done on the field. But thank y'all so much for joining us. We'll be back again next week. And I'm Stephen Johnson, basketball reporter. And
I'm Frank Bonner, Memphis football reporter.
All right. We'll see y'all next week.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.